I haven't kissed a woman in 20 years, the mountain man said to the obese girl. And then he did it. On a snow-choked night in the Colorado Highlands, a reclusive frontiersman opens his cabin door to find a runaway girl half frozen on his porch. By firelight, he speaks words no one expected, and with one trembling kiss, their fates are bound. But whispers rise in town. A cruel father claims her as property. Railroad men bring false papers. Deputies rattle their jail keys. And in a place where justice bends to greed, every step closer to freedom sparks new danger. Still, beneath the church bell's toll and the judge's gavel lies a hidden truth, a mother's deed that could change everything. Yet torn in half, stolen, and nearly lost to the storm, it may never be enough to save her. What happens when a lonely man risks his life for a girl the world calls worthless? Will one kiss be their undoing, or the beginning of a home no one can take away? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers, the ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The fire crackled in Jonah's cabin as wind howled through the Colorado peaks outside. Orange flames danced across rough-hewn logs, casting shifting shadows on the weathered floor. His boots creaked against the wooden planks as he stirred the embers, sending sparks floating upward like fireflies. The soft knock was barely audible above the storm. At first, Jonah thought it was just another branch scraping against the cabin wall. But there it came again, faint but desperate. 20 years of solitude had taught him to be wary of unexpected visitors, especially on nights like this. He grabbed his rifle and eased open the heavy door. Cold wind whipped snow into his face. There, crumpled in a heap on his doorstep, lay a woman in tattered clothes. Her face was half buried in fresh powder, her body shivering violently. "Lord have mercy," Jonah muttered, setting his rifle aside. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how substantial she was. The woman was large-framed, but right now she felt like dead weight. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch. Inside, he laid her gently by the fire. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe early 20s, with a plain but pleasant face now reddened by cold. Her clothes were torn and mud-stained, as if she'd been running through brush for days. Jonah grabbed a tin cup and ladled hot broth from the pot hanging over his fire. "Here now," he said gruffly, helping her sit up. "Get this down you before you freeze from the inside out." The woman's hands trembled as she took the cup. She sipped slowly, color gradually returning to her cheeks. Her eyes darted around the cabin like a trapped animal seeking escape. "Name's Jonah Briggs," he said, trying to sound less intimidating than his usual growl. "Reckon you got a story worth telling about how you ended up at my door?" She swallowed hard. "Martha Lou Dillard," she whispered. I ran away. From the railroad cookhouse." Her voice caught. "My father sold me to them," said a big girl, like me was only good for cooking anyway. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Jonah's jaw tightened. He'd heard tales of the railroad company's practices, buying up not just land but people too, especially women to work their cookhouses. Legal on paper, but no better than slavery in truth. "Been running 3 days," Martha continued. "They sent men after me. I lost them in the mountains, but," she clutched the cup tighter, "I was so scared." Jonah stared into the fire, memories of his own loss burning bright as the flames. 20 years ago, he'd held his wife's hand as she slipped away in childbirth. Their baby girl had followed soon after. He'd retreated to these mountains, letting grief turn him hard as the granite peaks. "I ain't kissed a woman in 20 years, he found himself saying, the words surprising him as much as Martha. Her eyes widened, but she didn't pull away when he shifted closer. Moving slowly, giving her plenty of time to refuse, Jonah leaned down. His kiss was gentle, almost clumsy from disuse. It lasted only a moment, but in that brief touch, something, long frozen inside him, began to thaw. Martha's face flushed pink, but not from cold this time. She ducked her head, a small smile playing at her lips. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something warmer, trust, maybe even hope. Jonah stood abruptly, unused to the feeling stirring in his chest. He added another log to the fire, watching sparks spiral up the chimney. Behind him, Martha's breathing grew steady and deep as exhaustion claimed her. He settled into his chair, rifle across his knees. The railroad men would come looking, no doubt about that. But they'd find more than just a runaway waiting for them. Something protective and fierce had awakened in Jonah's heart, a determination that this woman who'd stumbled into his life would not be treated as property again. Through the long night hours, Jonah kept watch. His eyes never left the fire, but his thoughts wandered paths they hadn't traveled in decades. Paths that led away from loneliness towards something that felt dangerously like purpose. The storm raged on outside, but in his cabin, for the first time in 20 years, the silence felt less empty. Martha slept peacefully by the hearth, the firelight softening her features. Jonah found himself studying her face, seeing not the plainness others mocked, but a gentle strength that called to something long buried in his soul. That kiss had done more than offer comfort. It had declared his protection, marked a line he hadn't known he was ready to draw. He touched his lips, still feeling the ghost of that brief contact. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. A crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. And like spring thaw in the mountains, once such cracks appeared, there was no stopping what might flow through them. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's frost-edged windows, turning the fresh snow outside into a sea of diamonds. Martha stirred on the bearskin rug by the hearth, her eyes fluttering open to unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic gripped her chest until she remembered. She was safe here, in Jonah Briggs' cabin. The mountain man himself sat in his wooden chair, already awake and watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered peaks. He acknowledged her with a slight nod, his expression unreadable in the early light. Martha pushed herself up, smoothing her wrinkled dress. I could make breakfast," she offered hesitantly, "to thank you for taking me in." Jonah grunted what seemed like approval, so Martha set about exploring his modest kitchen area. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted his heavy iron skillet, nearly dropping it. The clatter made her wince. "Here now," Jonah's gruff voice came from behind her. His weathered hand steadied the skillet. "Like this." He demonstrated how to properly season the pan over the fire, his movements sure and practiced. "Been cooking for myself 20 years. Reckon I've learned a thing or two." Martha watched carefully, grateful for his patience. "Back home, they never let me near the good cookware," she admitted softly. "Said I'd break everything, being my size." She ducked her head, shame coloring her cheeks. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. "Lost my Sarah in childbirth," he finally said, voice rough with old pain. "Our little girl, too. Couldn't bear to stay in town after. Folks pitying me everywhere I turned. These mountains, they don't judge. They just are." Martha nodded, understanding loneliness all too well. Together, they managed to prepare a simple breakfast of bacon and cornbread. The familiar tasks helped ease the awkwardness between them, though neither mentioned the previous night's kiss. After they ate, Jonah pulled on his heavy coat. "Got to check my trap lines," he explained. "Beaver pelts won't collect themselves. There's mending needs doing, if you've a mind to keep busy." He gestured to a pile of torn clothing and blankets before heading out. Martha spent the morning bringing order to Jonah's bachelor cabin. She swept the rough wooden floor, organized his scattered supplies, and carefully mended a warm blanket with neat, even stitches. The familiar work soothed her, making her feel useful instead of burdensome. Near midday, she paused in her tasks. The cabin felt different now. Cleaner, yes, but something else was missing. Then she realized there wasn't a single sign of prayer or faith anywhere in the home. Following her heart, Martha bowed her head over Jonah's table and whispered a simple blessing, asking for peace in this place that had sheltered her. The sun was low when Jonah returned, stamping snow from his boots. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the transformed cabin. His eyes lingered on the mended blanket, the swept floor, the organized shelves. Something shifted in his expression when he noticed Martha had arranged his few dishes on the table with care, like a proper home. Without a word, he set about preparing their evening meal, rabbit stew with the last of his stored vegetables. Before eating, however, he did something that made Martha's heart skip. He bowed his head briefly, the first prayer he'd offered in 20 years. They ate in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by quiet comments about the day's work. Once, Martha's description of chasing off a curious squirrel even drew a low chuckle from Jonah. The sound seemed to surprise them both, but it warmed. The air between them died as darkness fell outside. Jonah lit the oil lamp. Its gentle glow softened the cabin's rough edges, making it feel more like a home than a mere shelter. Martha sat by the fire, working on another torn shirt, while Jonah cleaned his rifle nearby. He found his eyes drawn to her more and more as the evening deepened. Her large frame, which others had mocked, seemed to fill the empty spaces in his cabin perfectly. Her gentle humming as she sewed chased away the silence that had been his only companion for so long. The kiss from the previous night remained unspoken between them, but its memory lingered like a promise. Watching Martha in the lamplight, Jonah realized with startling clarity that his cabin no longer echoed with loneliness. Instead, it felt warm, lived in, like the home he'd almost forgotten how to want. The days flowed together like spring snowmelt in the Colorado highlands. Each morning brought new lessons as Jonah patiently showed Martha the ways of mountain living. Though his words remained few, his actions spoke of growing care. "Stand like this," Jonah demonstrated, positioning the axe just so. "Let the weight do the work." Martha's first attempts at chopping wood sent the axe glancing off the log, but she kept trying, her face set with determination. The old mule button took to Martha right away. She learned to measure out his feed and brush his shaggy coat, talking to him in the gentle voice that seemed to soothe both beast and mountain man alike. "There now," she'd murmur, working out the tangles in Button's mane. "Ain't so different from making a home pretty, is it?" The snowshoes proved the greatest challenge. Martha's fingers, though skilled with needle and thread, struggled with the unfamiliar weaving patterns. "These here bindings got to hold tight," Jonah explained, showing her again how to secure the rawhide strips. "Man's life depends on good snowshoes up here." Each small victory brought a light to Martha's eyes that made Jonah's cabin feel warmer somehow. Her quiet humming filled the spaces between tasks, and even her occasional stumbles came with determined cheer rather than defeat. After a week, their supplies ran low enough to warrant a trip to town. Martha's hands trembled as she tied her borrowed shawl, but Jonah simply helped her up onto Button's back without comment. The 3-hour ride passed in comfortable silence. The whispers started the moment they entered the general store. Briggs brought himself home a fat runaway. One voice carried clearly across the wooden floor. "Heard tell she's some farmers. Girl, run off from honest work." Martha's shoulders hunched inward, making herself smaller despite her size. But Jonah's presence beside her never wavered. He stood straight-backed as he traded furs for supplies, his body positioned between Martha and the onlookers like a shield. The ride home stretched longer, Martha's usual cheerful chatter replaced by wounded silence. Jonah kept Button's pace steady, letting the familiar rhythm of hoofbeats fill the space. Between them, it wasn't until they were putting away supplies that Jonah finally spoke. What had been building in his chest all afternoon. "Ain't nothing to be ashamed of," he said gruffly, setting down a sack of beans. "Townfolk got small minds to match their small lives." Martha paused in arranging the new tin of coffee, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes I wonder if... They're right, though. If I'm just too much. Too big. Too clumsy. You're exactly what you ought to be," Jonah cut in, his voice rough but certain. "Seen you learn more in a week than most folks manage in a year. Seen you face every task with courage, even when your hands shake. That's worth more than being pretty or proper-sized." The lantern cast a warm glow as they shared their evening meal of beans and cornbread. Martha's quiet laugh at Button's antics earlier that day lingered in the air between them. "Your laughter fills this place better than whiskey ever did," Jonah admitted suddenly, surprising them both with his openness. "Been trying to fill the quiet for 20 years. Never thought it'd take someone else's joy to do it proper." Martha's cheeks flushed pink in the lamplight. "Thank you," she said softly, "for defending me today. For seeing me as me." The moment hung between them like fresh-fallen snow, delicate and full of possibility. But before either could speak again, the sound of approaching horses shattered the evening peace. 3 riders appeared through the gathering dusk, their forms dark against the snow. Martha's spoon clattered to the table as she recognized the broad-shouldered figure in the lead, her father. Flanking him were 2 men in railroad company coats, their hands resting too casually near their holstered pistols. "Martha Lou!" "Her!" Father's voice boomed across the yard. "Time to quit this foolishness and come home where you belong. These gentlemen got papers saying you're contracted to work, fair and square." Martha's face had gone white as the snow outside. Jonah rose slowly from his chair, his expression hardening into the mask of solitude he'd worn for 20 years. But his eyes, when they met Martha's frightened gaze, held something new, a fierce protectiveness that promised he wouldn't let her face this threat alone. The lantern flame flickered as the cabin door rattled with a heavy knock, casting sharp shadows across the walls that had so recently begun to feel like home. Jonah's boots creaked against the wooden planks as he stepped onto the porch, his Winchester rifle held steady but pointed downward. The 3 riders sat their horses in the falling snow, their breath making clouds in the cold evening air. "Evening, gentlemen," Jonah said quietly, his voice carrying across the yard. "Reckon you're a mite far from town for a social call." Silas Dillard, Martha's father, leaned forward in his saddle. His face was red with more than just the cold. "This ain't your business, Briggs. That girl belongs under my roof, and these men got papers, say she's contracted to work the railroad cookhouse." The railroad man on the left, dressed in a fine wool coat, pulled out a folded document. "Your daughter's labor was legally contracted, Mr. Briggs. 5 years of service to pay off family debts. She's railroad property until that term is served." "Ain't no such thing as human property," Jonah said, his voice growing harder. "Not in these mountains. Not anywhere." The second railroad man sneered, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Law says different. That contract's binding. You're harboring railroad property, old man." Behind Jonah, the cabin door creaked. Martha stood in the doorway, her face pale but chin lifted. Jonah shifted slightly, keeping himself between her and the riders. "She ain't going nowhere she don't choose," Jonah said. "Papers don't make right what's wrong in God's eyes." Silas spat into the snow. "Since when does Jonah Briggs speak for God? 20 years you've been hiding up here like a wounded bear. Now you're preaching at me about my own flesh and blood?" The railroad lawyer's voice turned cold. "We'll return with the sheriff, Mr. Briggs. The law will sort this out." He tucked the papers away. "Best prepare yourself for visitors." Best you prepare yourselves, Jonah replied evenly. These mountains can be mighty dangerous for men who don't know them like I do. The threat hung in the air like frost. After a long moment, Silas yanked his horse's head around. This ain't finished, he growled. The three riders spurred their mounts, disappearing into the gathering dusk. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Martha's composure crumbled. She sank to her knees on the porch, great sobs racking her body. I'm so sorry, she gasped. I never meant to bring such trouble to your door. You've been so kind, and now, Jonah set his rifle aside and knelt beside her, his rough hands gentle on her shoulders. Hush now. Ain't your fault men choose greed over decency. He helped her to her feet. Come inside before you catch your death. Back in the cabin's warmth, Martha's tears slowly subsided, though her hands still trembled as she tried to set the table for their evening meal. Jonah took the plates from her carefully. Let me do that. You just sit. They ate in silence, listening to the soft patter of snow on the roof. The familiar sounds of the cabin, the crack of the fire, the wind in the eaves, the quiet clicking of their spoons felt different now, as if the threat outside had made this space both more precious and more fragile. Martha pushed her food around her plate. What will we do? We'll do what needs doing, Jonah said simply. Won't let them take you back to being treated like property. But the law ain't always right. Jonah's voice was firm. Sometimes a man's got to stand on what he knows is true, not what some paper says. Martha looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. You'd do that? Risk everything. You've built here, for me. Reckon I would. Jonah met her gaze steadily. Been hiding from life too long as it is. After the dishes were cleaned and Martha had retired to the small bedroom, Jonah sat alone by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as he slowly, awkwardly lowered himself to his knees. Lord, he whispered, his voice rough with disuse. Ain't talked to you proper since Sarah died. Figured you didn't want to hear from me after all my cursing and raging. He paused, struggling with words that had grown rusty with 20 years of silence. Bud, that girl in there needs protecting, and I ain't strong enough alone. Help me stand firm. Help me be the man Sarah always said I could be. The prayer felt strange on his lips, like a language half forgotten. But as he rose and added another log to the fire, the cabin seemed to hold them both in a kind of grace. Two wounded souls who had found, in their unlikely pairing, something worth fighting for. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside, the warmth of shared purpose kept the cold at bay. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they were safe in this small sanctuary they had built together. The next few days settled into a tense rhythm at the cabin. Jonah rose before dawn, checking the approaches through the fresh snow. The signs of riders. He strung bells on twine between the trees and reinforced the cabin's shutters. His weathered hands worked steadily, preparing for whatever might come. Gotta show you something, he told Martha one morning, retrieving an old wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside lay a Colt single-action revolver, its blued steel dulled with age. Was Sarah's my wife's. Time you learned to use it. Martha's hands trembled as she lifted the weapon. I've never touched a gun before. Ain't hard once you know how. Jonah's voice was patient as he showed her how to load the chambers, explaining the mechanics of hammer and trigger. Remember slow and steady pressure. They practiced behind the cabin, using a plank with a charcoal cross as a target. Martha's first shots went wild, the recoil startling her. But she set her jaw and tried again and again until she could hit the mark more often than not. You're doing fine, Jonah encouraged, watching her determined efforts. Just keep at it. Like everything else, Martha said, smiling slightly. Lord knows I was clumsy enough learning to split kindling, That evening, Martha shooed Jonah from his own kitchen. "My turn to teach you something," she declared. "Sit down and let me work." The cabin soon filled with forgotten smells roasting. Rabbit rubbed with wild sage, cornbread browning in the iron skillet, coffee bubbling in its pot. Jonah sat in his chair, watching Martha move confidently through the space that had known only his solitary presence for so long. When she set the meal before him, memories flooded back Sunday dinners with Sarah. Grace sat over steaming plates, the warmth of shared food and fellowship. He took a bite of cornbread, closing his eyes at its perfect crumb. "Reckon you've got magic in your hands," he said gruffly. "Ain't tasted cornbread like this since." He stopped, throat tight. Martha's face softened. "Since Sarah?" Jonah nodded, not trusting his voice. They fell into comfortable routines. Martha insisted on mending Jonah's worn shirts, while he taught her to read weather in the clouds. They hauled water together from the creek, their breath making clouds in the cold air. In the evenings, Martha's clear voice lifted in hymns she remembered from church. And sometimes Jonah would hum along, surprising himself. One night after supper, as they sat by the fire, Martha spoke quietly. "Never knew what it was to feel safe. Before, Pa," she twisted her hands in her apron. "Nothing I did was ever good enough. Too big, too clumsy, too much of a burden. Said no man would want such an ugly daughter." Jonah's hands clenched on his chair arms, anger rising at the cruelty. He wanted to tell her how wrong her father was, how her gentle spirit and quiet strength had brought life back to his hollow existence. But the words stuck in his throat, decades of solitude making tenderness feel foreign. Snow fell steadily outside, wrapping the cabin in white silence. The fire crackled, casting warm light on Martha's face as she worked on patching a quilt. Jonah watched her shore, steady stitches, his heart full of things he couldn't say. "Martha," he began roughly, then stopped. The words hovered unspoken. "Stay here. Make this your home. Let me care for you always." But fear held him back. Fear of loss, of pain, of having something precious torn away again. Martha looked up, her eyes soft with understanding. She reached across and squeezed his hand briefly, then returned to her sewing. In the gentle quiet, something bloomed between them, fragile as a winter flower, but just as determined to grow toward the light. Days passed in this way, each small domestic task binding them closer. They worked together like dance partners, learning each other's rhythms, finding joy in shared labor and quiet companionship. The threat of riders returning hung over them, but in these moments of peace, they built something neither had known. They were missing a partnership of equals, founded on respect and growing affection. Sunday dawned bright and cold, sunlight sparkling on fresh snow. Jonah stood at the cabin window, fingers worrying the worn brim of his good hat. He hadn't been to church in 20 years, not since laying Sarah in the ground. "Reckon we ought to go to services," he said gruffly, not looking at Martha. "Small log church in town, if you're willing." Martha's hands stilled on the breakfast dishes. I don't know, Jonah. Folk can be mighty unkind about." She gestured at herself. "Let him talk," Jonah said firmly. "Lord's house belongs to everyone." An hour later, they hitched Jonah's old mule to his wooden sled. Martha settled among the blankets, wearing her cleanest dress and a shawl Jonah had found in his trunk. The runners creaked through the snow as they set out, their breath making clouds in the crisp morning air. "It's been a spell since this sled carried anything prettier than deer carcasses," Jonah mumbled, ears red beneath his hat brim. Martha ducked her head, smiling. The little log church sat on the edge of town, smoke curling from its stone chimney. As they approached, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the small crowd gathering outside. Martha shrunk closer to Jonah's side as they climbed down from the sled. "Well, if it ain't Jonah Briggs," someone muttered. "Finally crawled out of them hills." And look what he brought with him. A woman's voice added with a snicker. Jonah's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, the preacher appeared in the doorway. He was a slight man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "Welcome, friends," he said warmly, extending his hand first to Martha, then to Jonah. "We're glad to have you join us today." Inside, they took a bench near the back. The rough-hewn walls glowed in lamplight, and a pot-bellied stove radiated heat. More whispers followed them, but Martha tried to focus on the simple beauty of the space, the wooden cross on the wall, the worn hymnals. The sunlight streaming through small windows. The service began with a hymn Martha knew from childhood. Amazing Grace. She hesitated at first, then joined in softly. Her voice quavered on the first verse, but grew stronger as she continued. The familiar words wrapped around her like an old quilt, bringing comfort she'd almost forgotten. Beside her, Jonah stood silent, head bowed. But as the congregation reached the final verse, Martha noticed something glinting in his beard tears. Catching the lamplight, his shoulders trembled slightly as the music filled the small space. The preacher's sermon spoke of finding shelter in storms, of God's love for the outcast. His gentle words seemed meant just for them, though he never looked their way directly. Martha felt hope unfurling in her chest like a flower reaching for sun. After the service, clusters of townspeople gathered to talk. Most kept their distance, throwing suspicious glances. Martha heard fragments of harsh whispers. Living in sin. Up there, always was peculiar. Sighs of her, but then an elderly widow approached, her face creased with kindness. Without a word, she took Martha's hand and squeezed it warmly. The simple gesture brought tears to Martha's eyes. The ride home was quiet at first, both of them wrapped in their thoughts as the sled runners whispered through snow. The winter moon hung bright above the pines, casting blue shadows. Finally, Jonah cleared his throat. "Been a long time since I heard them hymns," he said. "Stirred something in me I thought was dead and buried. Like spring water under ice, just waiting to flow again." Martha's heart swelled at his words. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "In there, singing with everyone, for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Like maybe the Lord sees me different than people do. He ain't the only one," Jonah murmured, so quiet she almost missed it. They rode on through the crystalline afternoon, the mule's harness jingling softly. The cabin appeared ahead, smoke rising straight from the chimney into the clear sky. Martha watched it grow closer, this place that had become more home to her than anywhere she'd known before. Something new had awakened in both of them, a tender shoot of faith, pushing up through years of hard ground. Despite the whispers, despite the stares, they'd claimed their place in the church community. It wasn't acceptance from everyone, not yet. But it was a beginning. The bright winter moon lit their way home, casting long shadows across the unblemished snow. In its pure light, they dared to hope for more than just survival, for healing, for belonging, for joy restored. A week passed quietly at the cabin, each day settling into comfortable rhythms. One afternoon, Martha sat cross-legged by the fire, finally taking time to sort through her small leather satchel, the only possession she'd managed to grab when fleeing her father's house. The warm bag held little: 2 handkerchiefs, a broken comb, and the dress she'd run away in. As she turned the satchel over, her fingers caught on something in the lining. Frowning, Martha probed the loose seam and pulled out a folded envelope, yellow with age. Her heart stopped when she recognized her mother's delicate handwriting. "To my dearest Martha Lou," it read. With trembling hands, she broke the seal. "My precious daughter," the letter began. Martha's vision blurred as she read her mother's words. "If you're reading this, I've gone to be with our Lord, but I've left you something no one can take away, the deed to 20 acres of good land, south of Miller's Creek. Your grandmother left it to me, and now I leave it to you. The papers are filed proper at the county seat. This land is yours alone, my sweet girl. Remember that you are worthy of so much more than your father ever showed you." The letter fell from Martha's shaking fingers as she burst into tears. Jonah, who'd been mending a trap by the window, was at her side in an instant. "What's wrong?" he asked, his gruff voice gentle with concern. "Mama." Martha could barely speak through her sobs. She handed him the letter indeed. Jonah read slowly, his eyes widening. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. "This changes everything, Martha. Your father can't claim you owe labor if you've got your own property. This here's your protection legal and proper." Martha wiped her eyes with her apron. "I never knew. Mama must have hidden it, knowing what Papa was like." Fresh tears spilled as she touched her mother's signature. "She thought of everything, trying to keep me safe even after." Jonah awkwardly patted her shoulder, then straightened up. "This calls for celebrating," he declared. "I've got a nice piece of venison saved back. How about you make that stew of yours?" Martha nodded, managing a wobbly smile. As she worked at the stove, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot, joy began to bubble up inside her like a spring. The cabin filled with savory aromas as the stew simmered. Jonah set the table with his best tin plates, the ones without dents. He even brought out a jar of preserved peaches he'd been saving. The lamplight cast warm shadows as they sat down to eat. "To your mama," Jonah said gruffly, raising his coffee cup. Smart woman she was. Martha clinked her cup against his. "She would have liked you," she said softly. "She always said God works in mysterious ways." Jonah cleared his throat, staring down at his stew. "Been thinking on that myself lately," he admitted. "Way you showed up that night, half frozen. Way things have worked out." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Reckon maybe the Lord had a hand in bringing you here. For a reason, I mean." Martha's heart skipped a beat. She watched Jonah's weathered face in the lamplight, seeing the vulnerability beneath his gruff exterior. "I reckon he did," she whispered. Their eyes met briefly, before both looked away, cheeks flushing. But something warm and tender hung in the air between them, delicate as a soap bubble. Laughter came easier after that as they finished their meal. Martha told stories about her mother's terrible singing voice but beautiful heart. Jonah shared memories of his own mama's cooking disasters. The cabin felt full of light and life in the distance. Wolves began their evening song, their haunting calls echoing off the mountains. But inside, Martha felt no fear. For the first time since running away, she let herself imagine more than just surviving a real future with a home of her own. The D in her pocket meant freedom. And the way Jonah looked at her across the table, eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled, made her wonder if that future might include more than just independence. The lamp burned low as they sat together, comfortable in the quiet. Hope glowed bright between them, warming the cabin better than any fire. The morning sun cast long shadows across fresh snow as Jonah hitched the mule to his sled. Martha clutched her mother's letter close, wrapped in her warmest shawl. The precious deed lay carefully folded in an oilskin pouch, protected from the winter damp. "Ready?" Jonah asked, helping her onto the wooden seat. His rough hand lingered on her arm a moment longer than necessary. Martha nodded, though her heart fluttered with nerves. "Ready as I'll ever be." The sled runners cut clean tracks through the snow as they made their way down the mountain toward town. Martha watched Jonah's profile against the bright sky, noting how he sat straighter today, as if carrying a new purpose. At the county clerk's office, heads turned as they entered. The clerk, Mr. Henderson, peered at them over his wire-rimmed spectacles, his thin mouth pursed with doubt. "Well now, what brings the mountain man to town?" Henderson's tone carried a sharp edge. His eyes slid dismissively over Martha. Jonah stepped forward, one hand resting protectively near Martha's elbow. "Not a deed needs recording," he said firmly. "Legal inheritance from her mother." Martha placed the yellowed papers on the desk with trembling fingers. Henderson lifted the documents like they might bite, examining them through narrowed eyes. "Rather old," he muttered. "Need to verify these properly." He shuffled through leather-bound records, comparing dates and signatures. Minutes stretched, like hours, as Martha held her breath. Finally, Henderson grunted. "Everything appears to be in order. 20 acres south of Miller's Creek, originally deeded to Sarah Beth Dillard." He dipped his pen. "I'll record it now." The scratch of his pen seemed to echo in the quiet office. Martha felt tears prick her eyes as he pressed the official seal into red wax, making her inheritance real and binding. Word spread through town like wildfire. By afternoon, Martha could feel the weight of stares as she and Jonah visited the general store. Whispers followed them down the boardwalk inside Murdoch's saloon. Her father's drinking companions muttered darkly. But Jonah drew himself up to his full height, shoulders squared. "That land's hers fair and legal," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "Her mama saw to that. Anyone says different can take it up with me." The saloon fell silent. Martha's heart swelled at his defense of her dot as evening approached. Lamplight spilled from the log church windows. Inside, the regular Wednesday gathering was beginning. Martha hesitated at the door, but Jonah gently urged her forward. "Ain't nothing to fear here," he murmured. The congregation turned as they entered. Preacher Wilson's wife smiled warmly, making space on her pew. During the sharing of testimonies, Jonah suddenly stood. Martha caught her breath. In all his years in the valley, he'd never spoken in church. "Been a long time since I thanked the Lord for anything," Jonah began, his voice rough with emotion. "Lost my taste for gratitude when Sarah died. But I reckon I was wrong to turn away." He cleared his throat. "God sent Martha Lou to my door that stormy night. Brought light back to my cabin. Showed me I wasn't cursed to be alone." His eyes found Martha's. "I'm grateful for her presence in my life. That's all I wanted to say." Silence held for a moment before Widow Jensen began to hum "Amazing Grace." Others joined in, the hymn rising sweet and clear. Martha saw several women dabbing at their eyes. After the service, people who had previously avoided them stopped to chat. The blacksmith wife pressed a jar of preserved pears into Martha's hands. Even crusty old Doc Miller nodded respectfully as they passed. Snow was falling again as they walked home, big flakes catching in Martha's hair. The moon hung low and full, turning the world silver. "Did you mean it?" Martha asked softly. "What? You said in church?" Jonah was quiet for several steps. "Every word," he finally replied. "These past weeks, well, reckon I've felt more alive than I have in 20 years. He stared ahead at the snowy path. "Used to think God had cursed me to walk alone. Now I'm thinking maybe he was just waiting for the right time to send someone special." Special. Martha's heart thundered in her chest. Gathering her courage, she slipped her mittened hand into his. Jonah tensed for just a moment. Then his fingers closed warm and sure around hers. They walked on through the gentle snow, hand in hand, their joined shadows stretching before them in the moonlight. For the first time since her mother died, Martha felt truly seen, truly valued. And Jonah, his face softened by starlight, looked like a man who had finally found his way home. 2 weeks of peace melted away like spring snow when hoofbeats thundered through town. Martha's father led the charge, his face twisted with rage, followed by 3 deputies and a railroad lawyer in a smart black coat. Their horses' breath steamed in the cold morning air as they reined up before the courthouse inside. The lawyer spread papers across Judge Miller's desk. "The deed is clearly forged," he declared, adjusting his wire spectacles. "And this mountain man, this Briggs fellow, has unlawfully detained Miss Dillard against her will." The deputies mounted up again, rifles gleaming as they rode toward Jonah's cabin. Snow crunched beneath their horses' hooves, the sound carrying across the hushed valley like breaking glass. Martha was hanging wash on the line when they arrived, her cheeks pink from the cold. Jonah stood splitting wood nearby, his axe frozen mid-swing as the riders approached. "Step away from the girl," ordered Deputy Wilson, leveling his rifle. Jonah dropped the axe and moved protectively toward Martha. "She ain't going nowhere, she don't want to. She's coming home," her father spat, dismounting heavily. "That deed's as fake as your claim to her." Two deputies seized Martha's arms, while the third struck Jonah with his rifle butt when he lunged forward. The blow caught him across the temple, sending him staggering. Blood trickled into his beard. "Jonah!" Martha screamed as they dragged her through the snow. She fought like a wild thing, but the deputies were stronger. "Please, no! He didn't do anything wrong." Jonah struggled to his feet, only to be struck down again. The deputies beat him methodically with their rifle butts until he lay still in the bloodied snow. They hauled him up, arms wrenched behind his back, and marched him toward town. Word spread quickly. Townsfolk lined the street as the grim procession passed. Martha sobbed and struggled in the deputy's grip while Jonah stumbled between his captors, blood matting his hair. Some witnesses turned away, shame clear on their faces. Others nodded grimly, muttering about order being restored. Widow Jensen stepped forward, wringing her hands. "This ain't right," she protested weakly, but no one joined her voice. The jail door clanged shut behind Jonah. He slumped onto the thin bunk, his entire body throbbing. Through the barred window, he could hear Martha's continued screams as her father's wagon rattled past. "Lord," Jonah whispered, his split lips moving in prayer for the first time since his wife died. "Protect her. Keep her safe." His voice broke. "Please don't let her suffer for my failure." Outside, Martha's father secured her in his wagon with rough hands. "Brought nothing but shame on this family," he growled, lashing the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels cutting deep ruts in the muddy snow. Martha huddled against the wagon's wooden side, tears freezing on her cheeks. Each jolt of the wheels carried her further from the only true home she'd known since her mother died. She pressed her face into her hands, remembering Jonah's gentle kiss that first night, his quiet strength, the way he defended her dignity. Before the whole town dawned in his cell, Jonah touched his bruised ribs, each breath a struggle. The deputy had lit a single lamp, its weak light barely holding back the gathering dark. Night settled over the town like a heavy blanket, muffling the sounds of life, continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Through his pain, Jonah kept praying, his whispered words a lifeline in the darkness. "Lord, I know I turned from you when Sarah died. Thought you'd abandon me, but Martha showed me different. Showed me hope again." He pressed his forehead against the cold bars. "Don't let that light go out, please." Miles away, Martha's father's wagon creaked through the night toward his distant ranch. Martha had stopped crying, but her silence spoke of deeper wounds than tears could express. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the injustice below. The same moon that had blessed their walk home from church now cast harsh shadows across the snowy landscape in town. Most citizens had retreated to their warm homes, trying to forget the day's events. But the weight of unspoken guilt lay heavy in many hearts. The preacher's wife sat long at her kitchen table, remembering how Martha's voice had lifted their hymns. The blacksmith's boy snuck scraps to the jail's back window. Though Jonah left them untouched, the night stretched on, marked by Martha's quiet sobs in the jolting wagon, by Jonah's ceaseless prayers in his lonely cell. Two souls, torn apart by greed and prejudice, held fast to the memory of brief happiness shared. The town slept uneasily beneath a sky that seemed too vast, too empty to contain such sorrow. Cold seeped through the stone walls of the jail cell as Jonah paced back and forth. 7 steps one way, 7 steps back. His boots scraped against the rough floor, each turn marking another moment without Martha. The bruises from the deputies' rifles had darkened to purple, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. Moonlight filtered through the barred window, casting stark shadows across the cell. Jonah paused, pressing his forehead against the icy iron bars. 20 years ago, he'd held Sarah's hand as she slipped away, their newborn son already gone. Her last words echoed in his mind now, clear as morning bells. "Don't hide from God, Jonah," she'd whispered, her fingers growing cold in his grip. "Promise me." But he had hidden. For 2 decades, he'd buried himself in the mountains, turning his back on faith, on community, on love itself. Until Martha stumbled through his door that snowy night, bringing light back into his dark world. The weight of those wasted years pressed down on him. Jonah's knees buckled, and he sank to the stone floor. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I broke my promise to Sarah, ran from you like a coward." Tears dripped into his beard. "But I'm done running. Please, give me strength to make this right." His prayer continued through the night, sometimes whispered, sometimes silent, but steady as a heartbeat. Each word felt like ice breaking in a spring thaw, faith flowing again after years of frozen silence. Miles away, at her father's sprawling ranch house, Martha scrubbed the wooden floor on hands and knees. Her father stood over her, boots planted, firmly on boards she'd just cleaned. "You'll learn your place," he growled, tracking mud across her work. "No daughter of mine will shame me by running off with some mountain hermit." Martha kept scrubbing, her raw hands trembling. But beneath her worn dress, she felt the reassuring crinkle of paper. Before the deputies had dragged her away, she'd managed to snatch up the torn pieces of her mother's deed. Her father thought he'd destroyed it, but she'd gathered every scrap, hiding them close to her heart. The sun slanted through dusty windows as Martha worked her way across the floor. Her back ached and her knees were bruised, but she refused to break. Every stroke of the brush was a quiet act of defiance. They could force her body to work, but they couldn't touch her spirit. As evening approached, Boot Wilson, one of the younger ranch hands, passed through the kitchen. He pretended to stumble, dropping half a loaf of bread near Martha. "Oops," he muttered, then added in a whisper, "Briggs is still fighting for you, miss. Heard tell he's been praying day and night up in that jail cell." Martha's heart leaped, but she kept her head down, secretly sliding the bread into her apron pocket. The knowledge that Jonah hadn't given up gave her fresh strength. She thought of their shared meals in his cabin, the way he defended her dignity, taught her to split wood and load a rifle. No one had ever believed in her like that before. Outside, a fierce mountain storm howled through the peaks. Snow drove sideways past the ranch house windows, and wind rattled the glass panes. Martha thought of Jonah in his cold cell and pressed her hand against the hidden deed pieces. The paper fragments felt like hope itself, precious and fragile, but not destroyed. That night, in her narrow bed under the eaves, Martha carefully pulled out the torn deed. By moonlight, she pieced the scraps together like a puzzle, reading her mother's loving words again. "My dearest daughter," the letter began, "this land is your inheritance, your chance at freedom." Tears splashed onto the paper, but Martha quickly wiped them away. She couldn't risk smudging the ink. This deed was more than just a legal document. It was her mother's last gift, proof that someone had seen her worth long ago. The storm raged on, rattling the ranch house timbers. In his jail cell, Jonah knelt in prayer, his faith growing stronger with each passing hour. In her cramped room, Martha held her mother's words close, refusing to surrender to despair. Though separated by miles and stone walls, their spirits remained unbroken, bound together by something stronger than distance or chains. Through the long night, snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountains in white. The storm mirrored their inner turmoil, yet beneath its fury lay the promise of spring, of renewal, of hope that could not be extinguished. Like the seed that survives winter's grip, their love and faith endured, waiting for the chance to bloom. Again, the evening shadows lengthened across the jail cell floor as Jonah huddled on his thin mattress. The temperature had dropped with the setting sun, and his breath came out in visible puffs. A shuffling sound from the corridor made him look up. "Who's there?" Jonah called out softly, moving to the bars. A figure emerged from the shadows. Henry, the Ute scout Jonah remembered from trading encounters in the high country. The man's moccasins had muffled his approach, and his dark eyes studied Jonah carefully. "Been watching," Henry said quietly. "Saw them bring you here." He glanced down the empty corridor before continuing. "The woman they took, her mother was kind to my people." Jonah gripped the iron bars. "Martha's mother? How do you know her?" Henry's weathered face softened with memory. "Many winters ago, my youngest son fell sick with fever. No medicine man could help." He touched his chest. "Martha's mother took him in, nursed him day and night. She saved his life when others turned away." The revelation stunned Jonah. He'd known Martha had her mother's gentle heart, but this story painted a deeper picture of the family's legacy of kindness. "The woman gave without asking tribe or color," Henry continued. "I have not forgotten." He squared his shoulders. "Now I repay that debt." Jonah leaned closer to the bars. "How?" "I know people, old settlers, traders who remember when that land deed was first written." Henry's voice dropped even lower. "They can speak truth about Martha's claim." "I will find them." Hope flickered in Jonah's chest for the first time since his imprisonment. "It's dangerous, Henry. Her father's got influence with the railroad men. They won't take kindly to anyone helping us." A ghost of a smile crossed Henry's face. "I have walked these mountains longer than they have lived here. They will not catch me." Jonah reached through the bars, offering his hand. Henry clasped it firmly, the gesture sealing their alliance. "Thank you," Jonah whispered hoarsely. "I reckon God sends help in unexpected ways." "The Great Spirit works through many hands," Henry agreed. He pulled his blanket closer around his shoulders. "I go." "Now, watch for signs." Before Jonah could respond, Henry melted back into the shadows as silently as he'd appeared. The only evidence of his visit was the lingering hope he'd left behind. Miles away at her father's ranch, Martha sat in her locked bedroom, a single candle burning on the windowsill. She'd managed to hide the precious fragments of her mother's deed in a loose floorboard, but the weight of isolation pressed heavy on her spirit. The flame flickered as she knelt beside her narrow bed. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength like you gave Daniel in the lion's den." Her fingers traced the rough quilt, remembering the comfort of Jonah's cabin. "Please watch over him. Keep him safe in that cold cell." The wind moaned around the eaves, and Martha shivered. Yet something in her refused to break. Her father might control her body, but he couldn't chain her spirit or her prayers. She thought of her mother's courage in helping others, even those different from herself. That same strength flowed in Martha's veins. "I won't give up," she promised the empty room. "Not while there's breath in my body and truth on my side." Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Snow fell in thick curtains, driven sideways by the wind. Henry moved like a shadow through the swirling white, his years of tracking experience guiding his steps. He knew the locations of several old-timers who might remember the truth about Martha's land claim, if he could reach them before the weather worsened. The scout paused at the crest of a ridge, studying the valley below through the falling snow. His own people had lost so much land to broken promises and false papers. But here was a chance to honor a true debt, to stand for justice across the boundaries that divided people. Henry adjusted his wool scarf against the bitter wind and began his descent into the valley. The storm wrapped around him like a cloak, hiding his passage from unfriendly eyes. He carried with him both risk and promise, risk to himself if caught, and the promise of redemption for those who had shown kindness when it mattered most. As he disappeared into the whirling snow, 3 separate prayers rose into the night. Jonah's from his cell, Martha's from her locked room, and Henry's ancient words whispered in his native tongue. 3 hearts bound together by honor, justice, and the memory of a woman's long-ago mercy. The storm raged on, but through its fury, hope had found a path forward. Henry's quiet pledge of help had bridged more than just the distance between cultures. It had connected past to present, mercy to justice, and prayers to action. The dawnlight crept through the jail's barred window, painting pale stripes across the stone floor. Jonah lifted his head at a familiar whisper from the corridor. Henry's face appeared between the bars, his eyes alert for guards. "Found them," Henry breathed, sliding a leather pouch through the narrow gap. 5 elders remember when Martha's mother first claimed that land. They signed statements. Jonah's bruised hands trembled as he opened the pouch. Inside lay several folded papers, their edges worn, but their words clear and true. His heart leaped at the sight of official seals and signatures. "Railroad men visited some witnesses yesterday," Henry continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to buy silence. You must move quickly." Jonah tucked the precious documents into his shirt. "How soon?" "Tonight." Henry glanced over his shoulder. "When moon sets, I will return." The day crawled by like molasses in winter. Jonah paced his cell, testing his injured leg. The deputy's rifle butts had left deep bruises, but determination numbed the pain. He touched the papers hidden against his chest, drawing strength from their presence. Miles away at her father's ranch, Martha scrubbed floors until her hands were raw. Her father loomed in doorways, watching with cold eyes. "Sign these papers." "Renouncing your claim," he demanded for the 100th time, waving railroad documents. "Stop this foolishness." Martha straightened her aching back. "No, Pa. That land was Mama's gift to me. I won't deny her memory." His face darkened. "That mountain man's filled your head with nonsense. You'll do as you're told." "I'm not property to be sold," Martha said quietly, thinking of Jonah's gentle kiss that stormy night. "God made me for more than that." Her father stormed out, slamming the door. Martha touched the loose floorboard where her mother's torn deed lay hidden. "Lord," she whispered, "protect Jonah. Give him strength to rise again." As darkness fell, Henry returned to the jail. The young deputy on night watch slumped at his desk, snoring softly. His coffee had been laced with sleeping herbs from Henry's medicine pouch. The scout worked quickly, using stolen keys to unlock Jonah's cell. "Hurry," Henry urged. "Guards change at midnight." Jonah limped out, grimacing at each step. The cold air hit his face like a slap as they emerged into the snowy street. His prison-weakened legs trembled with the effort of moving quietly through the shadows. "Town livery," Henry murmured. "Fresh horse waiting." They crept past darkened buildings, every crunch of snow seeming loud as gunfire. Jonah's injured leg threatened to buckle, but he forced himself onward. The papers against his chest were worth any pain. A dog barked somewhere, making them freeze. Boots scraped on a wooden porch. Henry pulled Jonah into a shadowy doorway as a townsman passed by, headed for the saloon. The moments stretched like taffy until the footsteps faded. "Almost there," Henry encouraged as they resumed their careful progress. The livery's dark bulk loomed ahead. True to Henry's word, a saddled horse waited in the shadows behind the building. Jonah recognized the animal, a sturdy paint pony from Henry's own herd. "She knows mountain trails," Henry said, helping Jonah mount despite his injuries. "Follow creek north until dawn. Martha's father's ranch lies west of Devil's Backbone Ridge." Jonah gripped the saddle horn, fighting waves of pain. "I can't repay this kindness." Henry's teeth flashed white in the darkness. "Already paid by Martha's mother long ago. Go with God's speed." The paint pony moved out silently, her hooves muffled by fresh snow. Jonah hunched low over her neck, letting her pick her way through the sleeping town. His leg throbbed in time with his heartbeat, but his mind stayed fixed on Martha. In her locked bedroom, Martha knelt by her window, praying into the night. The moon hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. She thought of Jonah in his cold cell, not knowing he was at that moment riding toward her. "Lord," she whispered, "whatever comes, help me stay strong like Jonah taught me. Help me honor Mama's gift with courage." A wolf howled in the distance, or perhaps it was just the wind. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter and kept her vigil, watching the moon sink toward the mountains. Something in her heart told her change was coming, as surely as spring always followed winter. The papers Henry had brought rested safely against Jonah's chest as his pony carried him through the night. Each hoofbeat brought him closer to Martha, closer to justice. His injuries screamed for rest, but he pressed on. Guided by starlight and determination behind him, Henry melted into the shadows of town, his debt of honor finally repaid. Before him lay miles of moonlit snow and whatever dawn would bring. But Jonah rode forward without hesitation, carrying truth and providence in his pocket, Martha's prayers lighting his way through the darkness. The county courthouse buzzed with tension. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that swirled above the packed benches. Martha sat rigid, flanked by deputies, her hands folded tightly in her lap as the railroad lawyer paced before the judge's bench. "Your Honor," the lawyer declared, adjusting his silk vest, "this woman's labor contract is legally binding. Her father received fair compensation for her services to the railroad cookhouse." Judge Harrison peered over his spectacles, his weathered face stern. Martha's father stood nearby, jaw clenched, eyes burning with anger. "She's my flesh and blood," he spat. "I've got rights to her work, same as any father." Martha felt shame burning her cheeks as townsfolk whispered behind their hands. The lawyer produced more papers, laying them before the judge with flourish. "Furthermore, Your Honor, this supposed deed she claims is clearly—" The courthouse doors crashed open. Everyone turned as Jonah Briggs stumbled in, leaning heavily against the doorframe. His prison clothes were torn and bloody, his face bruised, but his eyes blazed with purpose. Henry, the Ute Scout, stood quietly behind him. "I object," Jonah called out, his voice rough but strong. He limped forward, pulling wrinkled papers from his shirt. "Got something the court needs to see." The railroad lawyer sneered. "This man is an escaped prisoner." "Guards, let him approach," Judge Harrison ordered, holding up his hand. The deputies hesitated, then stepped back. Jonah made his way slowly to the bench, each step clearly painful. He laid out the papers, the sworn testimonies Henry had gathered, statements from elders who remembered Martha's mother's original claim. The room fell silent as will be ours. Judge Harrison studied the documents. Minutes stretched like hours. Martha hardly dared breathe. Finally, the judge looked up. These testimonies appeared genuine. The original deed bears proper county seals. He cleared his throat. "I find in favor of Miss Dillard. The land claim is valid, and no man may hold contract over her person against her will." Martha's father cursed, storming toward the door. The railroad lawyer gathered his papers with stiff dignity, avoiding everyone's eyes. Martha broke free from the deputies and rushed to Jonah's side. He wrapped his arms around her, steadying himself against her strength. "I haven't kissed a woman in 20 years, he said softly, just as he had that first night. Then he bent down and kissed her tenderly, right there in front of judge and jury. The courthouse erupted in cheers and sobs. Even Judge Harrison wiped his eyes. Henry smiled from the doorway, nodding once before slipping away. Martha and Jonah held each other, their kiss a promise of healing, of home, of justice long delayed but finally served. Weeks passed like gentle snowmelt in the Colorado highlands. Spring whispered through the pines as Jonah and Martha transformed the cabin into something neither had dared dream of: a true home. The deedland, a gentle slope near the creek crossing, became their way station. Martha set up a cooking area under a canvas awning where her skillet sizzled with venison and cornbread. Tired travelers stopped to rest their horses, drawn by the smoke from her cook fire and the promise of a hot meal. "Best biscuits this side of Kansas," declared a weathered cattle driver, sopping up gravy with a chunk of bread. Martha blushed at the praise, remembering days when her sighs had brought only mockery. Now her generous portions and warm smile made the cabin a beacon for weary souls. Jonah, who once bristled at any human contact, found himself trading stories with visitors around the evening fire. His gruff manner softened into quiet strength as he helped mend wagon wheels or offered advice about mountain passes. "Reckon the Lord had other plans than letting me stay a hermit," he told Martha one evening, watching her stir the soup pot. She smiled, noting how the deep lines of grief had eased from his face. Each Sunday morning, they hitched a mule to their wagon and rode to the log church in town. No whispers followed them now. Instead, Martha joined the choir, her clear voice rising in hymns of praise. Jonah sat in the front pew, head bowed in reverence, no longer hiding from God or man. The widow Thompson brought them a quilt she had pieced. The blacksmith's wife shared her preserved peaches. Slowly, sacred bonds of community wrapped around them like warm wool on a cold night. One evening, as snow fell in soft curtains outside their window, Jonah and Martha sat by the hearth. The cabin glowed with lamplight, steam rising from 2 tin cups of coffee on the table. The iron kettle bubbled quietly, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called to the moon. Jonah reached for Martha's hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her palm. "Time for evening prayers," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They bowed their heads together as Jonah spoke. "Lord, I thank you for this home, for family restored, for a second chance I never deserved. You brought light back to these dark mountains through Martha's heart, made me whole again." Martha leaned against his shoulder, tears gleaming in her eyes. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside their cabin, two souls once broken had found their peace, bound together in faith, wrapped in love, standing tall in dignity. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.